My name is Elias Carter, and I've spent the better part of a decade building a life most people don't understand. I'm a freelance documentary filmmaker, 34 years old, based out of Boulder, Colorado. My days are filled with camera gear, travel, late-night edits, and stories most people will never see. I've filmed endangered animals in the tundra, followed indigenous movements in the Amazon, and once even documented a political coup in East Africa. It's not glamorous, but it's real, and it's mine. Unfortunately, my in-laws don't. See it that way. To Margaret Whitmore, my mother-in-law, I've always been a hobbyist with delusions of grandeur, and to her husband, Douglas, a retired venture capitalist with a taste for vintage wine and verbal condescension, I'm a living reminder that his daughter married beneath her potential. Every Sunday, like clockwork, we drive to their sprawling Georgian-style home on the east side of town. There, beneath vaulted ceilings and around an antique oak dining table, Margaret fawns over her children. Douglas critiques the Dow Jones, and I pretend not to hear his snide remarks about gig economy dreamers. My wife, Isabelle, Izzy, to me, always squeezes my hand under the table when it gets too much. It's our quiet code for "I know, I'm sorry, please just make it through dinner." I do it for her. Always have. The night everything changed was Margaret's 65th birthday. I had just returned from Alaska, frostbitten and jet-lagged, with SD cards full of footage I hoped would land me a spot in a major film festival. I was exhausted. My bones ached from the cold. My eyelids drooped from lack of sleep. But Izzy insisted we couldn't skip the celebration. "Just a few hours," she whispered, brushing snow off my coat. "We'll eat, smile, give her a gift, and go." I should have listened to the knot forming in my stomach. The evening began like every other. Margaret greeted us in a silk blouse the color of champagne. Douglas barely looked up from his tablet. Izzy's younger brother Grayson made a show of arriving late with his Instagram influencer girlfriend, and I quietly counted the minutes. Then, in the middle of dessert, Margaret made an announcement. "I made a special sangria," she said, beaming. "Just for you, Elias, you must try it." She vanished into the kitchen, and I, ever the polite son-in-law, offered to help carry the drinks. That's when I saw her, alone by the marble island, carefully pouring a clear liquid from a glass dropper into one of the glasses. It wasn't wine, it wasn't flavoring. It was something else. When she saw me, she jumped slightly, then smiled too brightly. "Oh, Elias, I've got this. Go sit, and this one's for you." I thanked her, took the tray, and swapped the glasses the moment she turned her back. I placed the doctored one in front of Douglas and made up an excuse about drinking water instead. 45. Minutes later, Douglas was pale, sweating, and excusing himself from the table. Violent coughing and retching echoed down the hall. Margaret's smile evaporated, her eyes darting to me, wide, panicked, knowing, and that was just the beginning. The dining room was silent except for the clatter of silverware and the distant sounds of Douglas's misery reverberating through the marble-tiled hallway. Margaret sat still, her fingers trembling slightly as she dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. Izzy had already risen, concern etched into her face as she hurried after her father. I stayed in my seat, hands folded, watching. Margaret. Her eyes found mine across the table, and in that shared silence something shifted. A war of expressions flashed across her face, panic, confusion, then something colder, calculated. But I didn't flinch. I simply tilted my head and offered her a small, unreadable smile. The room, the house, the whole damn world suddenly felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a stage play where everyone else had a script but me. Grayson cleared, his throat awkwardly. "Probably just shellfish," he said, glancing around. Margaret stood. Yes, of course. Douglas had oysters earlier this week. He's been off ever since." Her voice was too rehearsed, too immediate. She vanished. Into the hallway, heels clicking like a metronome of dread. Izzy returned 5 minutes later, pale and distracted. "He's okay," she said, touching my shoulder. "Just resting." I nodded. "That's good, but I already knew it wasn't food poisoning. It was something far more deliberate." Back at home, while Izzy got ready for bed, I sat at my desk with the untouched glass Margaret had intended for me. The faintest shimmer floated across the surface, catching the light in a way wine never should. My mind raced through every possibility. Allergy? Accident? No, not with the way she'd looked over her shoulder, not with the way her hands had trembled as she clutched the glass. I remembered her words clearly. Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law. The next morning I made a call. "Jason," I said as he picked up, "I've got something strange. I need it analyzed." Jason Brooks was a former client, a chemical toxicologist who now ran a private research lab in Fort Collins. Years. A day ago I'd filmed a piece on environmental contamination for him. He owed me a favor. Personal or professional, he asked. Let's call it family. He didn't ask any more questions. 3 days later, Jason called me back. There were trace amounts of benzodiazepines in the sample, he said. Nothing fatal, but enough to knock someone out for hours, disorient them, cause memory gaps. Depending on body weight, maybe worse. I said nothing. The line buzzed with static between us. "Where'd you get this, Elias?" "Thanks, Jason." "That report you mentioned, could you email me a copy?" "Elias, thanks again." I ended the call and sat still for a long time. It wasn't a mistake. Margaret had drugged a drink. On purpose. For me. But why? That Friday I told Izzy I needed to skip Sunday dinner. She looked surprised but nodded. "You sure?" "I've got edits to finish before I submit for the festival. Deadlines are creeping." "You haven't missed a dinner in 3 years." "I know." She didn't push, but I could see the questions hovering behind her eyes. The next 2 weeks I spent quietly gathering threads, digging through local databases, court records, and old gossip columns. I didn't know what I was looking for, at first, but I found enough. Margaret had 3 overlapping prescriptions for Xanax, one from a family doctor, one from an out-of-town psychiatrist, and one from a telehealth service in California. She wasn't just over-medicated, she was covering her tracks. There were whispers around town too, nothing official, just the sort of stories you pick up if you know which yoga instructors and charity planners to ask. At a garden party, she once locked herself in a pantry and accused the caterer of stealing her jewelry. At the country club, she once shouted that someone had put arsenic in her wine. Nobody took her seriously. Rich people's drama, they said. But the signs were there. Still, hearsay wasn't proof. I needed something undeniable, and then it came, gift-wrapped in irony. Izzy sat across from me on a Tuesday night, absent-mindedly scrolling on her phone. "Mum says she needs new headshots. For the hospital board. You know, for their website. She asked if you'd take them." I looked up. "Seriously?" "She said you're the only one she trusts to make her look elegant but authoritative." Her words. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. "Tell her I'd be honored." That Saturday I arrived at the Whitmore's estate alone. No camera crew. Just me, a shoulder bag of lenses, and a sealed manila envelope. Margaret greeted me at the door in a pale blue power suit. Her pearls glistened under the chandelier light. "Douglas is at the club," she said. "We'll have the house to ourselves." I followed her to the sitting room. Sunlight spilled through tall windows. A single chair had been staged against a floral backdrop. She'd clearly spent the morning preparing. Before I even opened my camera bag, I handed her the envelope. "What's this?" "Just something I think you should read before we start." She opened it. Inside, Jason's toxicology report, a list of her overlapping prescriptions, and printed screenshots of online orders for powdered sedatives, some under a pseudonym, but the shipping address matched their home. She froze. "Where did you get all this?" "You know where," I said. Her hand trembled. "I would never—" "You did." A long silence. Then her voice changed, dropped its polite varnish and turned sharp. "You were never good enough for her. You're not from our world. You take pictures of dying villages and call it a job. You tried to poison me." Her lips curled. "It wasn't to hurt you, just slow you down, make you miss that gallery opening you wouldn't shut up about. She'd see you flake, see you're not dependable." "And then what?" "You'd sweep in with some investment. Banker from your alumni club? I don't need to explain myself to you." "No, but you're going to explain it to your husband. And if you don't, I will." She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "He'd never believe you." I smiled. "He doesn't have to. Because I had something stronger than trust. I had proof." Margaret stood frozen, the envelope still open in her hand. Her eyes didn't blink. They simply flicked back and forth across the toxicology report, the prescription records, and the printouts that now threatened to unravel the perfectly curated life she had spent decades constructing. "I'm not going to the police," I said quietly. "Yet," she exhaled sharply, as if the breath had been knocked from her chest. "Then what do you want?" "Two things," I replied, voice calm. "First, you tell Douglas what you did, in your own words. Second, from now on you treat me with respect, not fake smiles, not passive-aggressive dinner digs, real, actual respect." "You think that's how this works?" Her composure cracked. "You think you can walk into my home, threaten me, and make demands? You're nobody, Elias. No money, no name, no influence. My daughter married a man with a backpack and a camera, and called it a future." I stepped closer, low and measured. "And yet somehow I still outplayed you." Her mouth twisted, but no words came. I picked up my camera bag. "You have 3 days. If I don't hear from Douglas by then, not you, him, I'll assume he still doesn't know, and then I'll make sure he does." I left without taking a single photo. That night, the narrative began to shift. Izzy came home late from work, tossed her keys on the counter, and told me, with a hesitant voice, that her mother had called in tears. "She said you were cruel, that you tried to blackmail her, that you threatened her. Is any of that true?" I paused. "Did she mention the lab report?" Izzy blinked. "What?" I opened my laptop and pulled up the scanned documents, the toxicology report, the overlapping prescriptions, and a few of the strange messages Margaret had sent me over the past few years. Some were framed as compliments, others veiled threats, but now, in context, they painted a different picture. Izzy sat down slowly, scanning each page. Her lips parted, then closed again. "My mother wouldn't do this," she whispered. "But she did. She couldn't." I didn't argue, I just waited. That night she cried herself to sleep beside me, and for the first time in our relationship, there was something between us that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not even betrayal, but silence. And in that silence I felt her starting to drift. 2 weeks passed. Izzy went to her parents' house alone every Sunday. She returned with red-rimmed eyes and short, distracted sentences. She was caught between the family that raised her and the life we'd built together. Margaret and Douglas had begun their work, planting doubt, spinning the story, retelling the past in subtle ways meant to divide us. Then, one morning, a small, unmarked envelope appeared on our doorstep. No return address, just my name. Inside was a USB drive and a single note. "You should see this. Vanessa, Grayson's wife, was always quiet, always cordial. But beneath her soft-spoken surface, there had always been something watchful about her. She'd once worked in cybersecurity for a private defense firm. I had no idea she and I had anything in common, until I opened the files. There were 3 short video clips, all taken from the security system inside the Whitmore's home. Clip 1, the kitchen, the night of Margaret's birthday dinner. She stands alone, carefully adding something to a wine glass from a small vial. Her hands are steady, her face calm. Then I enter. She startles, smiles too brightly, offers me the special glass. Clip 2, later that evening. Margaret and Douglas alone in the den. He's yelling, "You gave him the wrong glass." Her voice, "It's not the first time." Douglas goes quiet, shakes his head. "This is getting out of hand." Clip 3, 2 days later. They sit in the same den, calm now, sipping wine. Douglas, "He knows. He has something." Margaret, "Haley will never believe him. She's my daughter. She trusts me." Douglas, "What if she doesn't?" Margaret, "Then we break them, slowly, subtly, just like before. Start with doubts. She'll think it was her own idea to leave him." My stomach turned. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a campaign, a practiced, clinical strategy to sabotage their daughter's marriage, not just to me, but to anyone they deemed unworthy. I stared at the footage for a long time, then called Vanessa. Her voice was quiet. "They did the same thing to me," she said. "Tried to make Owen leave, said I wasn't the right kind of wife, too opinionated, too career-focused. For 2 years they chipped away at us. They nearly succeeded. Why didn't you tell him?" She hesitated. "Because he worships them. and because I was scared. Why send this now? Because I see what they're doing to you and I can't watch it happen again. The next day I received a text from Douglas. We need to talk, man to man, no wives. I agreed. We met at his country club, private lounge, leather chairs, dim lighting. He poured me a scotch without asking. Elias, he said smoothly, families are complicated. Margaret, she's protective, sometimes too much, but she means well. She drugged me. A mistake. She admitted it. I have her on video. His smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes did. A flicker of calculation. What do you want? He asked finally. Money? Influence? A quiet retirement for your troubles? I want you both to leave us alone. He laughed, cold, amused. You think you're the first person to try and challenge us? To marry into this family and think they're owed something? Haley always comes back. Ask her about Thomas. Ask her about the fiancé before you. I stared. Douglas smirked. He was a doctor, nice guy, we didn't like his background. Took 6 months, but she broke it off. Came home crying to her mother. I felt the room tilt slightly. History was repeating. Only this time, I had the whole story. I drove home with Douglas's words echoing in my head like an old film reel skipping in a projector. Ask her about Thomas. 6 months, came home crying. He wasn't just bragging. He was drawing a blueprint, their blueprint, proudly handing me the schematic of how they dismantle every part of their daughter's independence, one relationship at a time. That night, I waited until Izzy had fallen asleep before I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Bethany, her college roommate. We hadn't stayed in touch, but she'd always been kind to me. I messaged her on Facebook, half expecting no reply. She called 20 minutes later. Elias, Bethany, I know it's late. I need to ask you about someone. Thomas. A silence bloomed on the line. Oh God, she whispered. That was awful. What happened? He was perfect for her, he adored her, but her parents, they made it impossible. They convinced her he was cheating. Even showed her photos, fake ones, blurry and staged. Her dad hired someone. A private investigator, I think. She believed them. She didn't want to, but they're her parents. And when she finally broke up with him, they threw her this elaborate celebration. As if she'd survived cancer instead of ending a relationship. Bethany sighed. She cried for weeks, never really told anyone why. The next day, I reached out to Thomas himself. It took some persuading, and a promise that I wasn't. Trying to dig up old wounds, but when I told him who I was and why I was calling, his voice steadied. They ruined me, he said, and I let them. I still regret not fighting harder. He sent me everything he had. Emails, messages, photos of the evidence they gave Izzy. None of it added up under scrutiny. Timestamps didn't match, the angles were wrong, and the woman he was supposedly with was his cousin. They made me into a villain, he wrote, and she never looked back. I didn't stop there. I reached out to others, old friends of Izzy's who had drifted away, ex-boyfriends, even a high school best friend she hadn't spoken to in years. The pattern was always the same, distance, then silence, then total disappearance. If someone made her feel strong, independent, unshakable, they were erased, quietly, completely. Vanessa sent more footage, audio this time. Margaret's voice. Once they're divorced, we'll convince her to move home. Get her back into the fold. Douglas. She can run the foundation, meet someone proper. This was just a phase like that art major nonsense she went through. I compiled everything. Emails, videos, audio, testimonies, a case, a story. A documentary of destruction. But this time I was the one holding the camera. Then I planned dinner, just the 4 of us. Izzy, me, Owen, and Vanessa. No drama, just a home-cooked meal and a laptop connected to our TV. We ate in polite silence. Small talk, passing salad bowls, clinking silverware. And then, as the plates were cleared, I stood up. There's something I want you to see, I said. I hit play. For the next hour, nobody said a word. They watched their parents on screen, plotting, drugging, gaslighting, piece by piece, lie by lie. Vanessa held Owen's hand tightly. Izzy sat frozen, barely breathing. When the final clip ended, Margaret planting divorce ideas, Izzy stood slowly. She didn't cry. Not this time. Why didn't you show me this sooner? she asked. Because you needed to see all of it, I said. Not just what they did to me, what they've done to you for years. Owen shook his head. No. This is fake. My parents wouldn't do this. Vanessa turned to him. They did it to me too, Owen. He stared at her. Why didn't you say anything? Because you never would have believed me. Owen sat down hard, like his entire body had lost tension all at once. Later that night, Izzy slipped into bed beside me. I need time, she whispered, but I believe you, and I'm sorry I ever doubted you. I nodded. No grand words. No. I told you so. Just stillness, and the quiet sound of truth finally breathing. The next morning, Margaret called Izzy. I was in the room. She put the call on speaker. Darling, Margaret chirped, your father and I were thinking, you should come stay with us for a few days, clear your head. A little space can do wonders for a strained marriage. Izzy's eyes narrowed. I've seen the videos, Mum. Silence. What? What videos? The footage of you drugging Elias, of you two planning to destroy our marriage. You lied to me. For years. There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice shifted, brittle and defensive. Whatever he showed you was manipulated. You know Elias has always been dramatic. Izzy's voice cut clean. We're coming over tonight. All of us. Owen, Vanessa, Elias, me. And we're going to talk. No more lies. She ended the call before her mother could respond. Then she turned to me. They'll deny everything. I smiled. I know. That's why I'm bringing my camera. The Whitmore estate looked exactly as it always had. Symmetrical hedges, ornate lanterns, a polished door that glinted like a weapon in the evening sun. But this time it didn't feel like we were arriving for dinner. It felt like we were staging a coup. Vanessa and Owen were already there when we pulled into the driveway. Owen was silent, jaw clenched, eyes unfocused. Vanessa, for once, was not quiet. She was composed, but alert, like someone who's rehearsed for this moment in front of a mirror for years. Izzy reached for my hand before we knocked. Whatever happens, she said, I'm with you. Inside, Margaret met us in the foyer, dressed like she was hosting a charity gala. Cream silk blouse, navy slacks, earrings that sparkled under the chandelier. Douglas stood behind her in a navy cashmere pullover, and the kind of smug stillness that only years of unchecked power could teach. Welcome, he said, voice calm. Let's clear the air, shall we? I set down my tripod and pulled my camera from its case. Margaret frowned. What is that? I'm documenting this, I said. Family history. You know how I love stories. Douglas laughed once. You're insane. No, I said, locking the lens in place. I'm thorough. We gathered in the sitting room, the same one where they'd once planned the dismantling of their daughter's life. But this time, they were on camera. This time, they couldn't hide behind reputation or manipulation. I sat the camera down, hit record and began. We're here because for years you've told stories, I said. But now we're telling one too. It's called The Truth. And for the next 2 hours we laid it all out. Margaret interrupted, denied, faked tears. Douglas barked insults, called me paranoid, manipulative, accused me of doctoring footage, blackmail, obsession. But every time they tried to shout over me, I pressed the remote and played another clip. Margaret at the kitchen counter. Douglas yelling, "You gave him the wrong glass." Douglas smirking about Thomas. Margaret saying, "She'll think it's her idea to leave him." Each time the room got quieter. Each time their faces paled. A little more. When the final clip ended, Douglas and Margaret discussing how they'd regain control once Izzy divorced me, Izzy stood up. She faced them with the kind of clarity that can only come from heartbreak. "I love you both," she said. "But what you've done is monstrous. It's not protection, it's possession, and I won't be a part of it anymore." Douglas's expression cracked, just a moment, but he said nothing. Owen turned to Margaret, his voice hollow. "You tried to do this to me and Vanessa, didn't you?" She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. Vanessa stepped forward. "I tried to tell you, Owen, for years." He looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, and then he took her hand. As we gathered our things, I handed Douglas a small black USB drive. He looked at it like it might explode. "That contains everything," I said. "Footage, emails, testimonies, records, it's yours to keep." "What's this supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not going to ruin your name or your country club legacy. That would hurt Izzy, and I'd never do that." I paused. "But if you ever try to interfere again, with me, with Izzy, with our marriage, then that drive becomes public. I'll send it to every contact in your firm, every friend in your circle, every board you sit on." Douglas didn't speak, but for the first time since I met him, he looked at me not with condescension, but with caution. And maybe, somewhere beneath all that ice, respect. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said finally. I gave a thin smile. "You made a habit of underestimating people." I just stopped playing along. 6 months passed. Izzy and Owen both started therapy, together and apart. Conversations that had never been had before were finally being spoken aloud. Family myths cracked. Quiet wars ended. Douglas and Margaret kept their distance. Texts came now and then, stilted, formal. Holiday cards with signatures and no warmth. But they respected the new boundaries. And then, just before Christmas, we received an invitation dinner, the 6 of us. To a fresh start. Izzy wanted to go. "They're still my parents," she said. "And maybe this is the only apology we'll ever get." I agreed. But I wasn't naive. The house was immaculate, as always. The food was perfect, as always. But the energy was different. Douglas asked about my work without rolling his eyes. Margaret complimented my photos without sneering at the word freelancer. There was an unfamiliar effort in the way they spoke, moved, smiled. After dinner, Douglas asked me to join him in his study. He poured 2 glasses of scotch. "I have a proposition," he said, leaning forward. "You've got talent, real vision, and I may have judged you unfairly. I've been thinking about diversifying my firm, creative division, branding. I'd like to offer you a role, junior partner, high salary, full benefits." I stared at him, unmoved. "Why now?" "Your family," he said. "And you proved something. You protected my daughter. You didn't fold. That's the kind of man I want on my team." I didn't touch the drink. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but no." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Be reasonable, this is an olive branch." "No," I repeated. "It's another leash. And I don't wear collars." His face hardened. "Everyone has a price," he said coldly. I stood. "And that's why you'll never understand your daughter." In the living room, Margaret was showing Izzy old photo albums. "You were so happy when you lived at home," she said, flipping pages with delicate fingers. Izzy caught my eye across the room. I gave her a small nod. Her hand went to her stomach, almost unconsciously. "Mum." "Dad," she said, standing. "We have something to tell you." Everyone turned. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was breathtaking. Then Margaret shrieked with joy. Douglas smiled tightly, stepping forward, hand extended. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I said quietly. Then, leaning in so only he could hear, "This child will never be a pawn. Ever." His face didn't change, but his eyes did. He understood. 3 weeks later, we received a letter from Douglas's lawyer. Inside was a deed to the house we had been renting. Signed over to us, clean, no strings. Attached was a separate document, a trust fund in our child's name. There was no note. No apology, just acknowledgement. Our daughter was born in late June during one of those golden mornings when the world feels gentle and everything seems like it might turn out all right. We named her Eliza, after my grandmother, the first person who ever handed me a camera and said, "Go find the story." Izzy held her close as the nurses finished up, both women flushed and perfect in their own ways. I didn't cry when Eliza was born, not because I wasn't overwhelmed, but because the moment felt too still, too sacred for tears. I just stood, there memorizing every detail. 10 tiny fingers, a tuft of midnight hair, a breath so soft I thought it might float away. In that moment, I knew. This was it. This was the victory. Not the footage, not the confrontation. not the carefully placed USB drive. Her Margaret and Douglas came to the hospital 2 days later. They brought a tasteful flower arrangement, a silver rattle engraved with initials, and a silence that I couldn't quite read. They didn't offer advice. They didn't linger. Margaret held Eliza briefly, eyes moist, fingers gentle, and handed her back without saying much at all. Douglas gave me a nod that might have meant thank you, or maybe just you win. And then they left. For months things were quiet. No more meddling. No more thinly veiled insults. Just space. It wasn't peace, not exactly. But it was a ceasefire. And for us, that was enough. I opened a small gallery that fall, a single room in downtown Boulder, with exposed brick, warm lighting, and the smell of varnish still lingering in the corners. I filled the walls with images from 10 years of work. A lioness licking her cub in the Serengeti, a protester staring down a wall of shields in Myanmar, a glacial lake that had cracked under moonlight like broken porcelain. On opening night, Izzy stood beside me in a deep green dress, Eliza bundled on her hip. My parents had flown in from Oregon. My mentor, Paolo, flew from Florence. A long line of friends and former clients filtered in, offering hugs and praise and champagne toasts. Near the end of the night, Margaret and Douglas arrived. They didn't stay long. Margaret looked at the photos, her lips pressed into a thin line. Douglas shook my hand, offered one nod of approval, not advice, not critique, and left with little fanfare. But that nod, it meant something. It meant they saw the truth now, whether they liked it or not. One night, months later, after Eliza had fallen asleep in her crib and Izzy and I were curled up on the porch swing under a quilt, she turned to me. "Do you think they've changed?" she asked softly. I thought for a moment. "No," I said honestly. "But they've accepted that they can't change us." Izzy smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "Good," she whispered. Above us, the Colorado sky stretched out in quiet majesty, stars blinking like camera flashes from some distant, divine press event. I watched the dark silhouette of the mountains and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear. Not even pride. Peace. Because I hadn't won by becoming like them. I hadn't won by screaming louder, scheming better, or poisoning back. I'd won by refusing to play their game, by living well, by loving fiercely, by telling the truth and letting the truth do what it does best: illuminate, burn, heal. And now, years from that first poisoned glass, the only story that mattered was the one I was still writing. Not with vengeance, but with light. One photo, one frame, one life at a time. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and follow the channel.